Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Let's begin. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Feel the air travel gently down into your lungs, cool and refreshing. Hold it for a soft moment, and then release it slowly through your mouth, letting go of the weight of the day. Notice how that single breath already brings a little more ease to your body. Let your eyelids soften, even if they are not yet fully closed. Allow the muscles in your face to melt like warm wax in candlelight. Your jaw releases its quiet grip, and your tongue rests gently in your mouth. Feel your shoulders drop slightly, unburdened and free. Your neck softens as though invisible hands are lifting the weight from it. Let the simple act of sitting or lying here feel like the safest place in the world. Take another slow breath in. Imagine that this breath carries with it a soft golden light. As it fills your chest, it radiates calm through every nerve, every muscle. And as you exhale, see that light flow downward, melting tension from your body. With each out-breath, you become lighter, softer, more at ease. Every inhale fills you with peace, and every exhale releases the remnants of the day. Bring your attention to the crown of your head. Picture a warm, comforting glow gathering there, gentle and welcoming. It begins to drift downward, smoothing over your forehead, erasing lines of thought or worry. Your thoughts are like clouds passing on a soft wind, present for a moment, then drifting away. No need to hold on to anything right now. All that matters is this peaceful moment of release. The glow slides down to your temples and eyes. Your eyelids are heavier now, pleasantly drowsy. All the tiny muscles around your eyes loosen, and a soft stillness fills your face. The warmth continues to your cheeks, your lips, your chin. Notice your lips part slightly, relaxed and effortless. Your face feels open and calm, as though it is being held by the quiet night. Now feel the glow move down your neck and into your shoulders. These areas may have carried the weight of your day. But now, with each breath, they soften and release, dropping into the surface beneath you. Imagine your shoulders sinking into a warm cloud, supported and safe. Your arms begin to feel the same gentle heaviness. The warmth flows from your shoulders to your elbows, down through your forearms. It reaches your hands, relaxing each finger, each joint. Your arms are free of effort, floating lightly in your awareness. Bring the warmth into your chest now. Notice the rise and fall of your breathing, slow and steady. With each inhale, your chest opens softly, inviting peace. With each exhale, the chest settles, releasing tension like leaves drifting down a stream. Your heartbeat is steady and calm, a gentle reminder of life flowing effortlessly within you. Every beat seems to whisper, "You are safe, you are home." The glow now sinks into your stomach and lower back. These places can hold so much of our day without us realizing. Breathe into this space and let the light dissolve any knots of tension. Imagine them softening, loosening, and finally disappearing with your exhale. It flows into your hips and thighs. Your legs, strong and steady, are now completely free of effort. The light continues down through your knees, your calves, and your ankles. Finally, it reaches your feet, each toe softening as though sinking into warm sand. Your whole body is now bathed in comfort, heavy and light all at once. You are floating in safety, wrapped in a cocoon of quiet and ease. As your body settles, imagine yourself lying on a soft meadow at night. The sky above is endless and dotted with shimmering stars. A gentle breeze carries the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. The ground beneath you is warm, cradling you as though it has been waiting just for you. You can hear the faint hum of nature, a soft rustle, a whisper of life all around. You are a part of this night now. There is no separation between you and the world that holds you. Your breath is the breeze. Your heartbeat is the earth beneath you. Each blink of a star feels like it is breathing with you, guiding you deeper into calm. With every inhale, imagine your body absorbing the night sky's serenity. With every exhale, imagine the day's heaviness floating away like mist. If thoughts drift in, picture them as fireflies, beautiful but fleeting, then watch them vanish into the distance. Nothing needs to be solved right now. You are exactly where you need to be, resting, releasing, receiving peace. Feel yourself drifting further now, like a small boat rocking gently on a still lake. The water reflects the moon and stars, carrying you without effort. You are safe to surrender to its soft rhythm. You are free to drift wherever your dreams want to take you. There is a soft doorway opening in your mind. Behind it, sleep is waiting with open arms. You don't need to rush. You are already walking toward it with every slow, gentle breath. Feel the last threads of wakefulness unraveling. They are like tiny ribbons floating off into the night. What remains is peace, safety, and deep rest. Let yourself drift into that tender quiet now. Wrapped in warmth, surrounded by calm, carried by the night. This is your sanctuary, your soft place to land. Sleep is near, waiting for you with patience and kindness. Let it take you gently. Drift deeply. Rest completely and enjoy tonight's bedtime story. I didn't hear the house open so much as feel it. A shift in the air, a hinge inside me unceasing, as if some quiet door I'd sealed years ago swung inward and let the dusted light pour through. They called it the Harper House, though most of my childhood memories called it a silhouette. I used to bike past it with my camera bouncing in a backpack, catching glimpses of its sagging porch and shutter-squinted windows while coasting downhill toward the lake. No one went in. No one had, not since Mrs. Harper died and her sons scattered to cities whose names sounded like promises. Roof shingles slipped like loose teeth. Vines colonized the porch rails. The house became a rumor of itself, a shape you learn to skirt. I moved back home in late spring, tired to the bone of city light, how it kept you too alert to sleep and too numb to dream. My last photography assignment in the city had been for an artisanal bakery where the bread looked like sculptures and the patrons looked at themselves. When that series wrapped, I realized I'd never once tasted the bread. I packed my cameras in a box labeled "just in case" and came home to help my mother repaint her kitchen. She let me keep my box in the guest room, as if creativity were something that might wake in the night, thirsty, and reach for water. There is a special ache for artists when the thing you love stops speaking to you. For me, it was like standing at the mouth of a tunnel and calling my own name, listening for an echo that never came back. I spent the first month home taking photos of nothing that mattered. Rows of cereal boxes at the market, the grain of fence wood, clouds that tried too hard. They were technically fine. That's what made them unbearable. So when the email from the Town Arts Council arrived, subject line, community project, the Memory House, I opened it in a daze. They were finally opening Harper House, not to fix it, not to sell it, but to fill it with what it had always held in secret, people's lives. The rules were simple. Bring an object tied to a memory. Write a note explaining its meaning. Leave both in a room that feels right. Over 3 months, the house would become a living exhibit, an evolving archive of the town's heart. We'd like you to photograph the project, the email said, and gather notes for a digital archive. We thought of you because you know this place. You left, you came back. You see in both directions. I read that line 3 times. You see in both directions. It felt like a blessing and a dare. That first morning I stood on the gravel drive with a roll of caution tape sagging from the gate post, my camera hanging heavy under my jacket. Someone had strung fresh bunting across the porch, a friendly disguise for a house that might be shy at parties. The front door had been scrubbed. You could still see the old wear under the new coat of paint like a map of former touch. The Arts Council had set out a folding table on the lawn with tags and pens and a sign that read, "The Memory House, open today. Please enter with care." A group gathered in the yard. Curious neighbors, the council members, a high school art teacher with paint on her knuckles. The mayor's assistant made a brief speech about community and trust, but my attention drifted to the sound of the house itself. Boards creaking to a new rhythm, windows shivering as if they'd taken a breath. I snapped a photo of the front steps, trying to catch the feeling that ran over them like water. "You're Eliza, right?" A woman touched my elbow, then laughed softly at herself. "Sorry, I shouldn't sneak up. I'm Joe from the council. I'll be fielding questions and guarding the donation box. We're making this up as we go, but we're glad you said yes." "I wasn't sure I had," I said, and she smiled as if she recognized that edge. People were gentle when they crossed the threshold, like entering a church without its arrogance. The front hall was long and lacked a runner. Our steps made familiar sounds against the wood. To the right, a parlor with a pinked-edge rug that had once been fancy. To the left, a room that had devoured a piano. Dust in both like a fog. I kept my lens lid on to protect the glass while I looked, honoring the pause before the first photograph. The house felt heavy with the years it had kept. When you walked across the parlor, a crack in the window made a tiny harp sound. In the kitchen, the sink was a deep porcelain bruise, the kind you'd set blueberries in. Upstairs, a bedroom with wallpaper the color of old postcards. The air had that sweet, stale smell I always associated with attics and ponytail ribbons. I thought wildly of how many breaths this house had saved. By 11, the first objects arrived. A man I didn't know walked in, cradling a baseball glove like a sleeping animal. He was in his 60s, maybe, with sun-tufted hands. He placed the glove on the mantel in the left parlor and stood looking at it as if it were a person he had not seen in years. He made a tag. "Wore this every day one summer with Eddie down at the lot by Miller's Creek." I got good enough to catch a line drive without flinching. Eddie said this glove made me brave. He died the following winter. I wore it in my coat sleeve at his funeral because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. He didn't sign his name. He added in smaller handwriting, "It still smells like cut grass." I lifted my camera, asking permission with my eyes. He nodded. I took the photograph slowly, letting the glove fill the frame. Creases like laugh lines, the threads taut as instrument strings. When I clicked, the sound felt less like stealing and more like keeping a promise. Next, a teacup, white with a ring of violets, hairline crack repaired with what looked like clear glue, the saucer missing. A woman I remembered from the pharmacy placed it on the kitchen windowsill as if returning it to a small sunlit stage. Her note was neat. Bought at a yard sale on Cedar when I was 19. Used it every day with my mother for a year. She'd steep strong and then add an extra sugar, always with the same joke. For luck. After she died, I kept it in a box for 14 years because it hurt to see it alone. Today, it's ready to be looked at again. The teacup made me ache in a good way. The window light sat in its small bowl like a quiet lake. I photographed it from 3 angles, then set my camera down and traced the saucer's imagined edge with my finger in the air. For luck, I whispered to the empty saucer. Then came a music box, a brass one, the kind with a glass lid so you can see the comb and cylinder serenade each other. A teenage girl brought it in. She placed it on the piano in the right parlor and wound it just once. The melody was a little off, and I loved it for that. Her note was brief and messy. Grandma gave me this when I was 6. It always plays a little wrong. So did our time together. I still listen. By mid-afternoon, the rooms had begun to hum with these small arrivals. A church fan advertising a funeral home, a tin lunch pail with 2 dents like parentheses, a red scarf that smelled like a cedar chest. People moved through the house, portaging their grief and their sweetness, some in tears, some laughing in the surprised way you laugh when you find a perfectly preserved leaf you pressed as a child. I settled at the folding table in the front hall with a ledger for cataloging: object, note, room, date, photo file. Part of my job was to copy the notes into a digital format later, but I found that writing down each object by hand first helped me think of them not as relics, but as conversations. Every photograph is a talk, my first mentor had said. Not about what it shows, but what it asks. Jo floated through with her calm chaos, checking on tags, reassuring people that there was no wrong way to do this. At one point, she dropped a handful of change into the donation jar and whispered, "It's the clinking. I like the sound of it. Makes the place feel like it's working." Around 3, an older man in a pressed shirt and a young boy came in carrying a cardboard box together. The box had the tidy look of a thing that had been sealed and reopened more times than one lifetime requires. They set it down in the upstairs bedroom with the postcard wallpaper. The older man smoothed his hair, then looked at me almost apologetically, as if the house had asked him a personal question. "It's a quilt." He paused. "It's a lot of quilts." He pulled one out carefully, as if the weight of the thing might remember. It was a patchwork of small squares, cabbage roses, pale checks, the odd stubborn polka dot. In one corner, a name stitched with uncertain confidence: Ruth. His note, written on 3 tags because he had too much to say, told us Ruth was his mother and had sewn through the nights when he was little to keep them warm. And by the time they didn't need the quilts, she had kept making them for the habit of it. "She never threw one out," he wrote. "She never learned how to keep less love in her hands. The boy, his grandson maybe, said, "Can we lay them on the bed?" We did. One, then two, then three, like pages in a cloth book. The bed took the weight gratefully. I took a wide shot, then asked the boy to stand on the far side and press his hand to the top quilt. He did, smiling with an intimacy that made me catch my breath. The frame held both the old stitches and the new hand. It felt like proof of something. When we came back downstairs, I realized the house truly had begun to hum. Not physically. The boards were still boards, the glass still glass, but energetically, like a sea that noticed itself. You could hear small rustles in rooms with no one in them, the wing beat of memory crossing, the small vowels people make when they recognize something in a stranger's note. I set my palm on the hallway wall and felt it. Warmth traveling, a flicker of current. Around 4, I stepped onto the porch to breathe. The sky had cleared from the morning's clouds and settled into a silver you can't get right with any filter. I lifted my camera for the first exterior shot of the day and then lowered it again. I needed to feel the air on my face without framing it. Across the yard, a little girl dragged her mother toward the house. She held a shoebox wrapped in blue tissue like a treasure. When they reached the steps, the girl stopped short, tilted her head, and said, "Does the house like presents?" Her mother laughed. "I think it does." Inside, they placed the shoebox on a side table in the parlor and removed the tissue. Inside the box lay a collection of river stones, each painted with a tiny subject in a child's determined hand. A moon, a strawberry, a cat that looked like an onion, a heart made of 2 shaky halves that didn't quite meet. The girl's note was printed in pencils of various strengths. For my dad, we used to draw together on river rocks. He went away. If he comes back, I want him to see these. I took the photo as gently as a photograph can be taken. I realized a beat later that I was crying, real tears, not the elegant, damp eyes of a person watching a movie. Joe pressed a paper napkin into my hand that smelled faintly of kettle corn. "It's okay," she said, as if I had dropped something fragile and she was telling me it hadn't broken. In the late afternoon quiet, I went room to room, capturing the first day arrangement. The baseball glove, the teacup, the music box, the quilts, the stones. The house had indeed begun to arrange itself. A carpet fringe that had curled all morning now lay flat. A window that had fogged every time someone breathed near it now stayed clear. It could have been my imagination, and what a lucky imagination that would be. But it felt like the house was leaning in, listening to us listen to it. In the back hall, close to a door that led to a narrow scullery, I found a small object I hadn't noticed anyone place. Nothing on the tag suggested the identity of its owner. It was a key. Not a skeleton key for a grand door, but a small brass key with a paper label that said simply, "Wasn't mine then, is now." I photographed it twice, once alone, and once with the shadow of the stair rail falling across it like the bars of a song. When I copied the note into the ledger, my handwriting changed, a tilt that belonged to a younger version of me. I didn't like thinking about why. Just before closing, a tall woman with gray streaks in her hair stopped beside me at the table while her daughter explored the hall mirror. "I used to know you," she said, not unkindly. "You kept a camera even when you didn't have one." "Mrs. Ayres," I said, surprised by the memory of my fifth-grade art teacher's voice warming her name. "You're still here." She gestured around. "Like the house." Her eyes were kind, weathered by years of looking closely at things until they told the truth. "The council did well to ask you. You're one of the few who can stand between a moment and the need to fix it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I made a joke I half meant. "I'm out of practice at fixing, and maybe that's good." "Maybe it is," she said. "Sometimes documenting is a kind of care. Now," she slid a manila envelope from her bag and handed it to me. "For the archive. You can put it out tomorrow if you like." Inside, I found a photograph. Polaroid, soft corners, the white border smudged with fingerprints. The image showed the Harper House porch under first snow. In the corner, a date from the winter I was 12, and a note in familiar handwriting. "First snow at the Harpers. The house looks almost ready to sing." The handwriting was mine. Back then, I had a cheap Polaroid I bought with saved allowance and babysitting tips. I remembered taking that photo because I'd stood shivering in the street in my boots, waiting for the house to look at me. I had written the note not for anyone else, but for the future version of me who might one day require proof that she recognized song even before she could hear it. "How did you—" Mrs. Ayres shrugged. "When your mother moved, she gave me a box to hold until you were ready to want it. I never pry." The top was labeled "Photos, Keep." I don't know if that was instruction or description. Either way, I kept them. And I'm giving them back now because it seems like you're about to start wanting again. I put the photo on the table and took a picture of it with my newer lens. Old light, new light, same house. For the first time in months, my chest eased. As the sun sloped and people drifted out, we closed the guest book and tied the tags to their objects with little lengths of twine. Joe and I did a slow circuit, straightening, talking softly like you do in rooms that hold sleeping children or rescued animals. "We'll need a plan for fragile items," she said, "and a section on the website where people can upload longer stories if a tag feels too small." She smiled at me. "And space for your photographs to breathe." We locked the front door because the sign said we would, and because rules establish a comfort even when the thing we're doing is wild. I lingered on the porch while Joe packed the pens. The yard smelled like cut grass and the high school's practice field. Crickets in the ditches tuned their legs. A car went by slow, its driver leaning to look at the house with the kind of cautious hope you wear when asking a good question. "You okay?" Joe said, balancing the donation jar in a cardboard carrier as if it were a goldfish bowl. "I think so," I said, and then realized that wasn't the right verb anymore. I think I'm open. That night, I sat at my mother's kitchen table with my laptop, the ledger open to the first page, my camera unloading its memory into mine. I created folders by room, then subfolders by object, then exported web-sized images and wrote simple captions in a voice that felt both like reporting and prayer. Baseball glove on mantel, left parlor. Teacup on kitchen windowsill, music box on piano, quilt laid out, upstairs front bedroom. Painted river stones, child's hand. For the archive's homepage, I needed an introductory paragraph, something that explained the project without explaining it to death. My fingers hovered over the keys. Words used to arrive for me like birds. Lately they had felt like insects, skittish, purposeless. But now, in the quiet of my mother's house, I could feel the memory house reaching across town like a lighthouse 2 shades dimmer than obvious, and my hands began to type before my judgment could stop them. The Harper house has always listened longer than we have. This summer, we are giving it something to hear. The memory house is a living exhibit where the objects we kept, quietly, stubbornly, tenderly, can tell their stories in the rooms that once held other lives. Bring something you saved. Leave a note about why. Walk through and read the small paper flags of each person's weather. Take your time. There is no right way to remember. I read it twice and didn't hate it. I uploaded the first gallery, Day 1, Arrivals. I included the Polaroid of snow from years ago, captioned, "A house prepared to sing." The site went live. For a while I just sat there looking at the page, the tiles of images like windows. Then I did something small and necessary. I went to the guest room and opened my box labeled, "Just in case." Inside, on top of the cameras and cords and lens cloths, lay a folded strip of photo booth pictures I'd taken with my best friend Mia the summer before we left for college. We'd pressed our cheeks together and made faces, then at the last second, for the final frame, looked straight into the lens with our least jokey eyes. Mia died in a car crash halfway through our sophomore year. I had carried that strip through every apartment I rented afterward, always sticking it on the inside of a closet door, as if grief could be best managed with a little light and a lot of hiding. I put the strip in my pocket. I didn't know yet if I could let it go to the house, but I knew I wanted it to be near where the objects were learning to sing again. It felt honest enough for a first night. The next morning before the house opened, I let myself in with the key Joe had entrusted me. The air was cool, the kind of quiet that makes your own breath sound like a polite guest. In the kitchen, the teacup had caught a small pool of dawn in its bowl. In the parlor, the river stones had shifted in their box. A strawberry nudged against the moon as if sharing a secret. I walked room to room with my camera off, listening. Far back, near the scullery, I found the small brass key again. I picked it up, the metal warm, absurdly, and held it to the morning light. "Wasn't mine then," I said softly, finishing the note. "Is now." I wasn't sure if I meant the key or the house or my life. Someone had left the last page of the guest book turned up. In a neat hand I recognized from a pharmacy label, the woman with the violet teacup had written a P.S. before she left. "Thank you for letting us put our hands back on our own lives." I pulled out my camera and took one more photograph before the doors opened again. Not of an object, but of the threshold, the place where we hesitate and decide anyway. The porch boards, the door's shadow, the line of light across the floor like an invitation. When the shutter clicked, it finally sounded like someone saying my name in a way that made me want to answer. Outside, I heard early voices, quiet footsteps on gravel, the kind of morning that knows it will become a day. I tucked Mia's photo strip deeper into my pocket, not ready to place it, not ready to keep it fully, but ready to be ready. Then I opened the door and stepped aside, and as the first person crossed into the Harper house, the whole place exhaled, with us, with me, and began again. If you stand still long enough inside the Harper house, you can hear the rooms choose their own weather. I learned that on the second week, somewhere between cataloging 7 identical spoons and watching a teenage boy slip a dog collar from his back pocket with the careful shame of someone admitting kindness. By then, the dust had settled into something friendlier. The windows remembered how to catch late afternoon, and the doors stopped complaining every time we asked them to let us through. People kept arriving with boxes, pockets, aprons, envelopes. They came with wrists circled by rubber bands from recipes they'd rolled up, with jacket sleeves smelling faintly of cedar, with eyes that looked like the inside of a seashell. Soft, quiet, complicated. The house didn't just take things, it arranged them. The living room leaned towards laughter. The kitchen collected steam and cinnamon. The upstairs bedroom exhaled like a long-held breath. My job was to keep up, to name what the rooms were already doing. The living room claimed joy with an almost stubborn cheerfulness. By the end of week 1, its mantle wore a paper crown the color of confetti, and an old Polaroid of a first dance held in a silver frame so tarnished it looked like a storm cloud that had learned to tell jokes. The crown arrived on a Tuesday. in a grocery bag carried by a woman whose laugh startled even her. She placed it on the mantel and confessed, "It's from my 50th birthday. We ate bakery cake with too much frosting, the kind that paints your tongue. I wore it until midnight and then forgot it in the car for 2 years. My husband used to say I turn into a raccoon where celebration is concerned, attracted to shiny things, incapable of letting go." Her note, written on 2 tags tied together like friends, ended with, "I thought I'd be sad, leaving it. I'm not. It feels good to let the crown wear the room." The first dance photo came from a woman in a windbreaker who smelled like rain. She set the picture down near the fireplace and smoothed the cloth runner that some generous person had laid there to protect the wood. She looked at me the way people look at strangers they are about to tell the truth to. "Our prom," she said, tapping the frame. We didn't go with each other, but somehow we ended up on the floor for the first slow song. I remember his shirt had a loose thread, and I didn't have the courage to tuck it in. 3 years later, we danced in this room after our wedding reception because the car wouldn't start and his aunt still had a key to the Harpers' front door from God knows when. We twirled on this rug with our shoes off. I never told anyone that until now. Her note ended. We didn't last. The first dance did. The dog collar belonged to a golden retriever named Moose, who, according to the faded nameplate, once ate a Sunday newspaper and half a ham in the same afternoon. The man who brought it, broad-shouldered, thinner than his clothes wanted him to be, set it on the coffee table and spent a long time standing with his hands at his sides, as if they had been trained for years to reach down and find a head that wasn't there anymore. His note said only, "He sat beside me every morning during chemo as if he could pull the sickness out by staring hard enough." I owed him more walks than I gave. I still say goodnight when I pass the hallway where his bed used to be. I love you, Moose. Thank you for watching me heal, even past your time. The living room took these offerings and brightened. Someone added a string of lights along the bookcase, lavender bulbs that made the paper crown glow like a small moon. People lingered here. They laughed more easily than they expected to. I found myself laughing too, not the dutiful kind you offer to show you're listening, but the kind that breaks open like a yawn and becomes a shared exhale. The kitchen, meanwhile, discovered it had a memory for sweetness, the table filled with handwritten recipe cards, index cards flecked with egg wash, the blue lines faint as veins, the margins crowded with notes like, "Add a little more if stubborn," and "Taste with your mother's face in mind." A chipped sugar jar took up residence near the window, its lid slightly off kilter, never fully closing, as if sugar doesn't understand the concept of containment. A set of spoons, 7 of them, all different metals, all dented in their own decisive way, rested in a mason jar beside a stack of tea towels embroidered with days of the week. cooking smells lived only as ghosts here, and yet every time I entered the kitchen, I grew convinced I could smell cinnamon, tomato, basil, the clean fog of rice. People wrote their notes like recipes for their loved ones. For Adelaide, custard wants patience. Do not hurry the quiet things. For Sam, stir until the dull becomes glossy, like it's finding its voice. For me, from me, age 9. Sometimes mix-ins are just raisins, but if you close your eyes, they get almost chocolate. One woman placed the chipped sugar jar on the windowsill and leaned over it with her palms on the counter, as if making sure the jar approved of its new view. "My grandmother's," she told me, tapping the lid with a ring that had migrated to her index finger. She always left the lid askew so the sugar could breathe. "Everything sweet needs air," she'd say, which I now think was mostly about herself. Her note said, "For years I kept it at the back of a cupboard because the chip made me feel like I'd failed it. Today, I like the part that's missing. It lets the light in." I photographed the jar repeatedly, trying to catch the exact angle where the chip looked less like an accident and more like a mouth surprised into honesty. I began to think of the kitchen as the house's living archive of instructions for gentleness. The spoons kept scraping at me in the best way. Each spoon told a story of survival, bent to fit a hand with arthritis, burnished by countless soups, engraved with a tiny M that no one remembers the reason for. When I copied down their notes, I could feel the weight of the spoons in my own palm, as if objects can pass memory along like an ingredient. Upstairs, the front bedroom gathered what hurt. At first, I worried the room would buckle under the weight, but it turned out to be the strongest one in the house. People walked into it and grew quieter without looking scolded, and when they left, they moved like they'd been given permission to take a deeper breath. An empty perfume bottle arrived in a velvet bag. The woman who brought it didn't open the bag right away. She stood at the window, her hands cupping the soft pouch, wearing a face you put on only when you're about to set a small god back on its shelf. When she pulled the bottle out, the glass caught the light and turned it into something pale and honeyed. She set it on the dresser's lace doily, a doily some volunteer had placed there like a spell, and wrote, "This was my mother's favorite. She always dabbed too much on her wrists, then washed her hands like she was negotiating with a stubborn song." After she died, I opened the bottle once a year to see if it still smelled like her shoulder. Last year it didn't. That's why I'm leaving it here. It feels wrong and right at the same time. A child's shoe, white leather, scuffed toe, the laces tied into an improbable tight knot, sat beside the perfume by day 3. The couple who placed it did not offer an explanation with their faces, but their hands were so careful with one another's elbows that their note felt inevitable. "For Rose, we bought these for your first steps. We left town before you took them. The shoe stayed new in a box. We keep imagining different versions of you, each running towards a different ball of light. We will never stop. We hope you know that not taking a step with us is not the same as being gone from us. I took that photograph after the house closed, when the late sun turned the shoe's scuff into a shoreline. I took it slowly, framing the lace knot like a question. I went downstairs and sat on the steps and cried until the mosquitoes reminded me I was still a body on a stair in a town. The tears were loud inside me, but the house took them like rain, absorbed, held, not dispersed. The faded love letter came in an envelope with a map printed on the inside liner, remembering when paper used to turn into landscape. The letter was written on hotel stationery from a city 3 hours away, in a neat, nervous hand that made me think of someone writing in a parked car. The writer apologized and then described the exact shade of the sky the morning they met, down to its stubborn streak of white over the library. The person who placed it did not stay long. Their note said only, "I kept this for 30 years. I don't need my hands to hold it anymore." Up here I moved differently. Even my camera made a softer sound, the shutter subdued as if wrapped in wool. When I copied the notes in the ledger, I felt reverent and shy, like a child letting a bird step onto her finger. There were days I sat on the floor with my back against the hallway wall and just listened to the bedroom breathe. Between people arriving and my cataloging and the constant small work of keeping things both safe and reachable, straightening tags, refilling pens, asking the house for a little cooperation with the light, I began to realize I was doing something I'd never done in my work before. I was keeping vigil. In the city, I'd rushed. Deadlines, deliverables, shot lists. Here I became a witness. A silent one, yes, but not absent. My presence was the quiet kind that nods, shifts a chair, opens a window at the exact right time. I was not creating the story. I was honoring how it revealed itself. People started to recognize me. "You're the one with the camera," they'd say, as if the camera were a living thing that had chosen me. "You made my father's spoon look like a moon," one said. "You made our Polaroid look like it still believes in itself," another murmured, touching the frame gently as if waking it. Mrs. Ayres came on a Thursday and stood beside me while I positioned a tripod to catch the kitchen in late light. "You're not hiding behind it anymore," she said. "That's new." "I didn't know I was," I answered, though my chest felt like a drawer that had finally been pulled all the way out. At night, I carried the day back to my mother's table. The ledger lived there now, along with a bowl of peaches going softly toward jam. I uploaded photographs into folders titled with the room's new names in my head. The living room of breezy joy, the kitchen of inherited courage, the bedroom that holds. The object names lined up like mini chapbooks: paper crown, first dance, moose's collar, sugar jar, spoons, Adelaide's custard card, perfume bottle, Rose's shoe, letter with the hotel crest. When I typed the notes for the digital archive, I left the ellipses where people had left them, honored their underlines, saved their smudges as a kind of punctuation. With every object, I felt the town turn its pockets out. There were lint and secrets and bobby pins and miracles. The house became a kind of lung for us, breathing in what we could not bear alone, exhaling something we could live in. The living room grew chattier. Party hats multiplied like mushrooms after rain. Someone hung a strand of ticket stubs from a beloved local theater. A plastic trophy for best homemade salsa leaned against a stack of board games with missing pieces. In the kitchen, the recipe cards spawned more cards, spawned clipped magazine columns for meatloaf but not sad, and cake that forgives. The upstairs room accepted the confidences of a faded program from a memorial service, a crocheted blanket someone never finished. Note, I forgive myself for the undone. A box of letters returned unopened with forwarding address expired, stamped on the front like a sentence. I moved from room to room and felt like the town's soul had opened a window. I learned the sound of different kinds of footsteps. The brisk, don't think, just do it, of someone offloading a grief and running before it could change its mind. The slow shuffle of a person walking as if each step were a date they didn't want to miss. The light skip of a child tugging a parent toward the kitchen because I think I know this handwriting. I learned to read shoulders. I learned to keep tissues in the front hall without making a ceremony of it. I learned that silence, when tended, becomes something active and kind. Sometimes people asked me things I couldn't answer. Do you think it matters if I can't remember exactly where we bought it? Is it disrespectful if I'm happy to leave this? What if I come back and take it away? My answers turned into questions. What do you feel when you put it down? What would you like this object to do now that it's not working so hard for you? If you take it back, will you keep it differently? The house helped me. It had begun to speak in the subtle language of settled things. There were personal echoes, too. In the kitchen, a set of measuring cups with flour stuck under the handle made me think of my grandmother showing me how to level off with a butter knife that had a tiny nick near the tip. In the living room, the Polaroid made me touch Mia's photo strip in my pocket just to feel the edges, to remind myself I was not the kind of person who forgot. In the upstairs bedroom, the perfume bottle startled a small animal out of hiding in my chest. The part of me that still wanted to call out and say, I can't smell her anymore either. Every so often I'd step out onto the porch and watch shadows move across the lawn and remind myself my body had a shape. The town, for its part, began to orbit the house like a planet that had found a second sun. The grocery store put a small display of index cards and twine near the checkout with a sign that read, For your memory house note. The library hosted a Saturday Write Your Note hour and provided cookies. The high school art club made a banner that said, "Thank you for your courage." And then, embarrassed by the size of that statement, added smaller banners with doodles of spoons and party hats and a cartoon dog collar with a wagging tail. We had our bumps. A family argued quietly in the living room about whether to leave a stack of letters that might reopen old wounds. A boy tried to pocket a marble paperweight because he liked how it felt in his hand. He returned it tearfully after Joe sat with him on the porch and told him the difference between want and welcome. One afternoon, 2 notes blew off the kitchen table when someone opened a window too quickly, and we had 20 minutes of panic until we found them under the radiator like shy guests. The house was forgiving. It tolerated our human mess with the patience of something that knows time better than we do. By the end of the 3rd week, I could walk through the rooms with my eyes closed and still point to where the dog collar lay, where the sugar jar caught 4 p.m., where the perfume bottle kept a small light. I had never felt more included in something and less essential. It was strangely liberating. "You're the witness," Mrs. Ayers said when I confessed this to her while we were both pretending to organize the brochures. "Witnesses are what let truths stand up straight." One late afternoon, after a day of steady rain that pressed the world into an intimate hush, I went upstairs to photograph the love letter again. Water made the wallpaper smell like old books. The light was that color you only get after weather has washed everything of its distraction, gentle, exact. I set up the shot, took it again, took a third for insurance. The letter didn't change, but I felt something in me settle into a new position, like a picture frame finally finding the right nail. On my way back down, I detoured to the small back room we'd barely used, what used to be a sewing room, judging from the footprint of a machine in the floorboards. The window there is plain and square, perfect for catching slices of afternoon. People rarely went in, maybe because the room announces itself as transitional, like a comma. The sill was empty, or it had been. On that day, someone had left a small black rectangle there, just at the edge where the wood warmed the glass. A memory card, SD standard, no case, balanced like a dare. Beside it, a tag, the same tags we used for every object, like the house was absorbing our tools. And on it, in neat, round handwriting I didn't recognize, "For the photographer." I stood there not touching it, my hands deciding on their own to hang at their sides. I looked back into the upstairs hall, expecting someone to be standing there. No one. The house creaked in its familiar way. The rain ticked the window like an insistent cousin. "For the photographer," I read again, because sometimes reading a sentence aloud makes it declare what it is. The card sat with the practiced innocence of an object that knows exactly how to complicate a life. I called down the stairs to Joe. Did anyone leave this with you? She patted up, a pencil tucked in her hair like a punctuation mark. She peered at the card and the note, then squinted at me with a smile that was almost mischievous and almost concerned. "That's either very sweet or very unsettling," she said softly. "Do you want me to put it behind the table with the other items we're safeguarding?" I shook my head. "I should photograph it first, for the record at least." My voice sounded different to my own ears. Owl quiet, river steady, alert. And then, "I'll take it to the archive box." "Do you want company?" she asked. And when I said no, she didn't look hurt. She touched my elbow. "You can choose not to look. That's a choice, too." The card gleamed the dull gleam of things that hold more than you can see. I took a photograph of it on the sill, then a close-up of the tag, then a wide shot that caught the window and the rain and a small smear of light like a fingertip blessing. I copied the tag into my ledger. SD card, standard. Note: for the photographer. Location: upstairs back room, sewing room. Date: time. The act of writing it down calmed me, put the moment in a box lined with habit. I slipped the card into the small zipper pocket of my camera bag where I keep extra batteries and 2 bandages, just in case I cut myself on my own work. I left the note on the sill. The house breathed. I breathed back. All evening the card throbbed in my awareness like a hidden clock. At my mother's table, while peaches surrendered to sugar in a stainless pot, I uploaded the day's shots and placed the photographs of the card at the end of the folder like a footnote with a heartbeat. I told myself that people leave me things all the time. They leave me their objects, and their notes, and their faces, and their pauses. This was just another thing. It didn't feel like just another thing. I made tea and forgot to drink it. I opened the drawer where Mia's photo strip lay and closed it again immediately, the way you check a wound and decide not today. I composed an email to Joe with subject line: memory card, found, and then didn't send it, because the body part of me, the animal bright, instinct-tuned part, knew I needed to have my first reaction alone, like you sit with a poem before asking it what it means. In bed, the house's rooms arranged themselves in my mind like a quilt. The living room of party hats and a dog's name said like a kind of grace. The kitchen where sugar breathed and recipes reminded you to stir until the dull becomes glossy. The upstairs bedroom with its perfume that had forgotten the shoulder it once clung to. The shoe that had not stepped, the letter that apologized and then described the sky. And now a small back room offering me a square I hadn't asked for the photographer. At some point I slept. At some point I dreamed about opening a door that led to another door that led to another. In the morning, the decision felt like a bridge someone else had built for me in the night. I lifted my camera bag, felt the weight of the card in its pocket, and carried it back to the Harper house, back to the place where objects learn to sing again, and where I, quiet witness, had begun to remember the words. I unlocked the front door, stepped into the familiar hush, and paused a second in the threshold, letting the house greet me and letting myself greet it back. The living room smiled its papery smile. The kitchen prepared its patient hands. The upstairs bedroom held steady, ready. The back room waited without hurrying. I took the memory card from my bag and held it up to the light. "All right," I said to whatever part of the house or town or old self was listening. "You asked for me." And the house, I swear, seemed to shift its weight, the way a friend does when they're about to sit with you for a while. I slid the memory card into the reader with the cautious reverence of lighting a match in a room where the dark was friendly. The screen took a breath, thought about it, and then the thumbnails bloomed, small squares of time arranging themselves like tiles on a porch. I leaned in without meaning to. The first thumbnail made something behind my ribs stand up and look. A blue bicycle with streamers fixed to the handlebars like two small rivers. The neat rectangle of our old driveway. The smudge in the corner that I knew wasn't a lens flaw, but my finger because I never learned to hold still when I was excited. I clicked. The image leapt forward and settled. There I was, 7, maybe 8, elbows scabbed, front teeth too big for my mouth, and my pride even bigger. My mother's shadow stretched across the concrete, long and thin, the late-day sun taking liberties. My shoelaces were double knotted in my father's sailor's way, a knot that says, "You're leaving, but not too far." My bike leaned slightly, and I could hear the soft tick-tick-tick of its back wheel coasting. I could feel the heat of August on my scalp. I could smell the wild mint that grew between the driveway cracks because we had once dropped a handful there and my father said, "Let's see if it wants us." I sat back, exhale audible. I moved to the next photo like you move through rooms in a house that you know in the dark. My mother stood on our porch, a dish towel thrown over her shoulder, waving with her whole hand. She had not yet learned how to wave only her fingers to say hello and I'm okay at the same time, which is a skill the years teach. She had the braid she wore when she was trying not to cry. Braiding made her stubborn. The morning glories twisted around the railing, their small trumpets audacious. On the step, a jar of daisies I'd picked too short and she'd found a way to love anyway. Click, the garden. My father crouched beside the half-wild tomatoes, his laugh visible in the posture of his back. I could see it through his shoulders. That sounds impossible until you know a person's laugh as its own geography. He was showing me how to twist the tomato just so, to listen for the sound the stem makes when it lets go. Like a whispered yes, he'd said. In the photo, I am out of frame, but the plastic blue kiddie pool peeks in at the edge, and the hose snakes through the grass like a lazy thought. He wore the same hat he wore to everything that required sun and patience. He wore his wedding ring shiny from the habit of fidgeting with it when he told stories. I should have been shocked. I should have stood up from the table and paced. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, heavy and kind, the way a quilt does when you didn't know you were cold. Someone had given me back a door I thought I'd let the weather ruin. I tapped through more images, my mother's hands rolling pie crust on the counter I'd learned to count on, flour transforming everything into sisters, a Christmas tree lopsided and urgent, our old mutt, Penny, failing spectacularly at stay in front of a plate of cookies. In one, I sat under the maple with my first camera, a little gray point and shoot. Its strap looped around my wrist so tight it left an indent. The photo captured me looking not at the camera but through it, like a kid learning a language by instinct. My throat did that pre-cry tightening, the one that announces tears not as drama but as information. I didn't cry. I put both palms on the table and tried to keep my breathing in the shallow end. The house, my mother's house, not the Harper house, creaked as the air conditioner kicked on. And I realized that I had been bracing for city noises that would never arrive. A phantom bus downshifting, a neighbor shouting, a siren declaring the obvious. Here the loudest thing was a fly negotiating with the screen. "For the photographer," the note had said. Not a name. Not "Dear Eliza." But it had my childhood in its pocket. Whoever left the card knew what the blue bike meant. They knew the shape of my father's shoulders when he laughed. They knew where the light fell on our porch at 5 p.m. or, another possibility, they had found these photos in the strange currents of our town and rescued them, not as a test but as a gift. Who would even have them? Mrs. Ayers, my mother through some secret stash, an old neighbor with a box in a closet labeled "just in case" the way I had labeled my cameras. The thought warmed me, then flickered with unease. A gift with that much knowledge can feel like a hand on your back or a hand on your spine. You want to know which. I scrolled through the folder list. Whoever had compiled the card had organized the images into years and seasons in a way that made sense to the way memory breathes. Summer 2002, winter 2003, Dad's harvest, first day of 4th grade, bikes, blue, bikes, red. The red came later, a hand-me-down from a cousin, the color of trying too hard. There were duplicates, mistakes, photos where half the frame was my mother's elbow, photos where I'd cut off my father's hat and captured only his grin, mid-story. It felt honest, the residue of not yet knowing what you will one day need. I clicked on a video file I hadn't noticed at first, the name as generic as a shrug, mauve_0157. The screen stuttered and then the garden came alive in jerky green. My father's voice, not a memory of his voice, but his voice, came from the speakers. and it went through me like weather. "Okay, kiddo," he said, the camera operator clearly my mother, because I could hear her smallish laugh layered under his like the harmony she always sang when she didn't want to be heard. "Tell us what you're photographing today." In the frame, I looked very serious. "I'm looking for the part where the bee goes away and the flower is still a flower," I announced, because I had not yet learned to be embarrassed by what I meant. I aimed my little camera at the zinnias. A bee obliged me by finishing whatever business bees do and zinging off, a yellow comma leaving the sentence. I snapped a picture. I turned to the big camera and said, "Got it," with the authority of someone elected by no one and prepared to lead anyway. The video ended with my parents laughing softly in duet. Then the screen went still, and the room came back hard. The absence of their bodies was so present, it felt like a person leaning just out of sight. I closed the laptop and folded my arms on top of it and rested my forehead there the way I had as a teenager when I'd wanted to be dramatic but still near my homework. I could feel the cool of the aluminum against my skin. I breathed. I said, "Okay," not to the room, not to the screen, but to the memory card, to the person who had curated it, to the version of me on the video who believed she could tell a story if she just stared hard enough. "Okay, I hear you." The next morning I brought the card back to the Harper house. I needed to put it on the table in the front hall like an offering before it became a secret. Joe watched me place it in a small archival envelope like a librarian putting a beloved book on hold. "You looked?" she asked gently. "I did," I said. And I found myself. I tried to smile. "Turns out I live here." She put her hand just above my forearm, not touching, warming the air. "Do you want to tell me who left it?" "I don't know," I said, and felt the hollow of that not knowing become a bowl I could set things in. "Maybe I don't want to know yet." She nodded. "Then we'll let the house keep the question." I walked through the rooms with new eyes. Like all the angles I'd learned had shifted half a degree toward home. The living room's joyful debris caught me tenderly off guard. The paper crown, the dog collar, the Polaroid. I photographed a string of paper cranes someone had hung across the mirror, their shadows flocking like thoughts. In the kitchen, I reshot the sugar jar because the morning light had decided to forgive the chip more than usual. Upstairs, I sat on the floor and read the love letter again, this time hearing my father's voice reading it in mock seriousness, the way he used to read the classifieds to make my mother laugh. By noon, the rooms were busy with their weather. A little boy tried to trade his toy car for a spoon because they both are shiny and go places. An elderly woman brought a half-used candle and left a note that said, "For power outages." And the night my husband broke his hip and I needed light that didn't make a fuss. The house held all of it without getting visibly bigger. which felt like a trick I wanted to learn. Around 3, I found myself in the small back room again, the sewing room, drawn by the memory of finding the card there, as if returning to the scene of a surprise would yield more surprises. The sill was empty except for the note, which I had left. I picked it up and turned it over. The back was blank, the tag's fibers soft and stubborn beneath my thumb. I put it back down. I took a photograph of the empty sill anyway, because emptiness has its own face. That evening, because I couldn't not, I went to my old house. It wasn't ours anymore. New people had bought it when my mother downsized 2 years after my father died. I had sworn never to drive past because I didn't want to be the kind of person who measured their own seasons by other people's curtains. But now the card had shaken something loose, and I wanted to see the maple tree and forgive it for keeping growing without me. I parked across the street. The front porch wore a different paint color than my memory, a gentler blue. A pair of rain boots stood by the door, small, dinosaur-patterned. The morning glories had given way to a climbing rose, its canes tied up with care. In the garden, the raised bed still held 4 stakes where the tomatoes had been, as if the structure had stayed and the inhabitants had rotated. A child's drawing was taped to the front window. It was a family of stick figures, 2 tall, 2 short, 1 dog whose legs were definitely too many. The sky had been colored all the way to the edge of the paper. That detail undid me. When I was little, I had always left a thin white line between sky and border because I liked the idea of a margin. I sat there in my car with my hand on the steering wheel like a person rehearsing leaving. A woman walked out carrying a recycling bin and saw me. You never expect to be caught grieving cross-legged behind a windshield. I lowered my window and lifted my hand in apology and explanation both. I grew up here, I said. I'm not creepy, I'm just remembering. She smiled with her whole face. Oh, she said. Then welcome back. She set the bin down and joined me at the edge of the driveway like we were meeting on a front porch in a dream. Do you want to come say hello to the maple? We're very proud of it, like we grew it ourselves. I did not go in. That would have been a different story. But I stepped out of the car and stood where the driveway turned into path and let the maple lift the air above me the way it always had. I looked for the place in the concrete where the wild mint still fought for its life. It wasn't there. I knelt and pressed my fingers to the seam anyway, and for a second I could smell it. The ghost of a smell maybe, or my own willingness. The woman told me they'd found an old baseball under the porch with the name Penny written on it in orange marker, and they kept it on a shelf because we like to adopt strays that belong to the house. And I wanted to tell her that Penny had been a dog, not a kid. But I liked the misunderstanding better. It meant the house was making new mythologies. When I went back to my mother's, I didn't open the laptop. I went straight to my box of camera odds and ends, the small graveyard where batteries go to die and lens caps lose themselves for sport. Under a rubber-banded stack of receipts from a camera store in the city that had once felt like a sanctuary, I found it. The thin black strap from my first point-and-shoot. The edges were frayed where I had rubbed it against my wrist while waiting for bees to leave and flowers to remain. If I lifted it to my nose, it still smelled faintly of plastic and summer. I held it like a question. The house had asked for my attention. The memory card had given me the shape of what I was ignoring. I'd spent weeks witnessing other people's offerings, telling them gently that the act of leaving is a kind of keeping. I had taken Mia's photo strip out and put it back and out and back, like a person unsure if she was ready to speak. I had sat in the upstairs bedroom photographing the love letter, and heard my father's voice unspool, and felt my mother wave from the porch of a picture. The truth was too simple to be clever. It was my turn. The next morning I tucked the strap in my pocket, along with a tag and a pen, and the kind of courage you only recognize in hindsight. I unlocked the Harper house early, the air inside cool and patient, the light at the angle that reveals handprints and forgives them. I walked into the living room and thought of placing the strap there, among the paper crowns and dances and the collar that still smelled faintly of dog. But my first camera had taught me joy without witnesses. It had taught me to make a frame around a thing and say, "This." The kitchen had fed me. The bedroom had held me. But the living room, for all its laughter, felt too conversational. I wanted a corner that knew the difference between showing and telling. I went to the back room, the little square that had offered me the card. The sill looked ready. The wood was warm from a sun that was already rewriting the day. I set the strap down, and it made a sound I swear I heard. A soft hush, cloth on wood, like a person sitting down next to you and not saying anything you need translated. I threaded the tag through the strap's loop and tied it with a shaky bow. I wrote, "For the girl who thought she had to leave to find herself, she was here all along." I stared at the sentence and tried to backspace reality. It stood up straighter. It didn't need my help. I set the pen down and picked it up and added in smaller writing beneath the first line, "She left anyway. That was okay." She brought the light back. I stepped away to make the photograph. The strap on the sill, the tag, the way the window gathered the day. I focused, unfocused, refocused, keeping one eye on the frame and one on my own breath. When the shutter clicked, I felt a tremor through the floorboards that might have been a truck on the road, or might have been the house leaning, approving. I took a close-up of the knot in the tag's string because I liked how imperfect it was, how obviously tied by a human hand. Joe found me there and didn't speak. She took it in with her eyebrows first, a habit I'd come to love, and then her mouth softened the way people's mouths do when they see a baby in a grocery store, and it isn't about the baby so much as the reminder that beginnings keep happening. "It looks right there," she said. "It does," I said. "It feels quieter than I expected." "That's how true things behave here," she said. "They don't shout. They sit." Word traveled not because I told anyone, but because the house knows how to pass news along. That afternoon, Mrs. Ayers stood in the doorway of the back room and looked at the strap for a long time with her hands in her pockets like she was working hard not to teach it something. "Good," she said finally, not to me but to the air. "Good girl." The day filled and calmed, filled and calmed. A teenager read every recipe card in the kitchen as if cramming for a test called Feed People Kindly. A man stood by the paper crown and whispered, "Happy birthday," to someone the air chose not to identify. In the upstairs bedroom, the perfume bottle caught a different light and became amber where it had been honey. The child's shoe was joined by a small drawing of a foot with wings. Someone left a cassette tape labeled "Road Trip," "Singing Bad, Do Not Judge," and we put it in a player in the living room and let it warble through the afternoon like a good ghost. I moved through it all with a new steadiness. My hands knew what to do, but now they also knew why. In the ledger that night, I entered my camera strap as if it belonged to a stranger because that felt fair. Object: black camera wrist strap, frayed. Note: for the girl who thought she had to leave to find herself. She was here all along. Location: upstairs back room, sewing. Donor E, if needed. I typed the description for the archive and chose my words carefully, like I was measuring flour the way my grandmother had taught me. Knife level, no rushing. A small strap from a first camera placed on a windowsill where light keeps coming. An offering about return. I slept that night with the window open and dreamed I was riding my blue bike down the hill past the Harper house, my hair flattened by speed, my lungs aware of themselves. As I passed the house in the dream, it opened its door a fraction, like a person making room for a friend to sit at the table. I waved without taking my hands off the handlebars, which is a trick I never accomplished in waking life. The house waved back by letting a curtain lift. In the morning, I woke with the feeling of having made a decision that would keep deciding me for a while. At the Harper house, the strap sat where I'd left it, except time had arranged it a little differently, the way objects shift when they relax into belonging. Someone had left a note beside it, not on our tags, on a scrap of list paper where milk, basil, light bulbs shared space with "Call Carol." I remember that camera. You made me pose next to the lilac and I sneezed for 10 minutes. I'm glad you stayed long enough to leave this. The signature was a quick slanted A, which could have been anyone and somehow was everyone. The rooms continued their weather. The living room collected the giddy artifacts of lives that had learned to be giddy again. The kitchen refined its catalog of how to be tender on purpose. The upstairs bedroom steadied those who needed steadying, and the back room, little comma that it was, became a kind of hinge between the house and me. Each day I passed it, I checked the strap, not out of worry, but out of the devotion you reserve for something that is not a person and yet is. The mystery of the memory card didn't resolve. No one confessed, and I didn't go hunting. I liked the way the not knowing felt now, less like a splinter and more like a seed I hadn't yet decided where to plant. Sometimes mysteries are just the present's way of giving the past a place to sit down. I copied the video of my parents to 3 safe places, and once, when the house had closed and the light was doing that late-day forgiveness, I carried my laptop to the upstairs bedroom and played the clip quietly, letting my father's voice braid with the room's hush. I didn't weep. I smiled at the moment the bee left and the flower stayed, and I thought of all the leaving I had blamed on myself, or on this town, or on the broad category of time, when really, leaving is the air moving so something else can be breathed. A week after I left the strap, I found a new envelope on the front hall table addressed in block letters to Archive for E inside. It held a small photograph, the kind drugstore printers spit out if you ask them to. It showed the Harper House porch the winter I was 12, the same image Mrs. Ayers had returned to me. But on this one, in a fine pen at the bottom, a note had been added. I told you it would sing. It was my handwriting, older and steadier, or else someone had learned to write the way I do. I turned the photo over. On the back, in a different hand, ballpoint, lefty slant, a single line. You're listening. I tucked the photo into the ledger like a pressed leaf. I stood in the hallway and let the house tune me. The rooms weren't less mysterious because I had contributed. They were more intimate. That's the thing about finally adding your thread to a tapestry you've been photographing. You see the pattern differently, not because it changes, but because you do. People kept coming. The town kept emptying its pockets. I kept catching the way a spoon balances on a jar's lip and the way a note curls when the air is damp. I kept leaving space in the frame, a margin for the part of the story that doesn't translate. And every morning before I unlocked the door, I touched the sill in the back room where the strap rested, the place where a memory had found me, and I had finally remembered how to answer. For the girl who thought she had to leave to find herself, I had written. She was here all along. But the house, in its way, added an unwritten line every time the light crossed that sill. She left and learned how to see. And when she came back, she let us see her too. By the end of the first month, it wasn't just our town that knew about the memory house. A woman from 2 counties over arrived with a pie still warm in her lap for whoever is on the desk. and a retired trucker stopped on his way through after reading about us on a cousin's Facebook page. The house that had spent decades holding its breath now seemed to breathe in weather. You could feel it the way you feel a greenhouse, warmth that doesn't belong to the sun alone. Even on a weekday morning, voices braided on the porch. Do we need tickets? No, sweetheart, just your heart. I brought the good pen this time. At first, I thought the crowd would make me step back into my original role, quiet archivist, lens for other people's lives. But the opposite happened. The more the rooms filled, the more my silence felt like a missing ingredient. I found myself answering people instead of nodding them along. I asked follow-ups the way my father had asked follow-ups when I told him about my day, gently, so the story could keep being itself. On a Tuesday, a man in a neon safety vest stood by Moose's collar in the living room, hands braced on his hips the way people brace in front of a truth. He kept blinking as if he were trying to clear smoke. I hovered, then crossed the room. Was he yours? I asked. He didn't look surprised to be spoken to. No, he said, but the note. God. He sniffed and rubbed his nose with the back of his hand like a boy. I bring my wife to chemo every Monday. I sit there and I don't know where to put my hands. The part about the hallway where the bed used to be. He shook his head. I didn't know anyone else said goodnight to an empty place. We're learning all the ways people talk to what's gone, I said. He nodded, then looked at me properly. Are you the photographer? I'm Eliza, I said, which felt like yes. He pointed to the collar. You made that look like a medal. It is a medal, I said before I could check myself, and he laughed, a short, relieved sound. He stayed an hour, telling me about the way his wife hates the smell of the clinic soap, but loves the volunteer who ties scarves in good knots, about their dog who's alive and confusingly named Catfish, about the time they tried to pretend everything was normal and went to the county fair and bought a funnel cake out of spite. I didn't write while he talked. I listened. When he left, he rested his palm on the coffee table where the collar lay and whispered, "Thanks, Moose." And I pretended I had something in my eye. In the kitchen, a woman around my mother's age lined up her grandmother's spoon beside 6 other spoons as if introducing friends, then froze. "What do I say?" she asked me, eyes wide with the panic that sometimes follows tenderness. "What does the spoon say to you?" I asked. She laughed at the ceiling, a sound that made the curtains stir. "That I'm stirring too hard again," she said. "That not everything responds to force." "Write that," I said, and she did, her hand shaking only a little. Teenagers came too, more than I expected. They moved in quick bursts and long stalls like rabbits. They left skate wheels and friendship bracelets, a hoodie that smelled like bonfire, a checklist with the last box ticked, forgiving someone without telling them. They read every note, less nosy than hungry. One girl stood in the upstairs bedroom at the foot of the bed where the quilts lay and cried so quietly I almost missed it until the light made her tears into small comets. "You okay?" I asked. She wiped her face with her sleeve and nodded. "It's just—" She gestured helplessly at the perfume bottle, at the shoe, at the letter. Everyone tries so hard. "We do," I said. "It's one of our better flaws." She smiled, then pointed to my camera strap on the back room sill. "I like that one," she said. "It makes it look like time has hands." "Time can be useful if you keep an eye on it," I said, thinking of how my father used to set a timer when he made tea so the leaves don't get bossy. The more I spoke, the more people spoke back. The house, I realized, had taught us how to listen with our bodies. A man with a tattoo of a swallow on his wrist told me his swallow had been a dare to himself when he got sober. They're birds that know how to navigate by sight and sense, and that leaving his favorite shot glass in the kitchen felt right because it's where liquid has always made sense. A woman in scrubs came after a night shift and left a folded paper crane on the living room mantel. "I make one every time I can't fix a thing," she said, and then bought a jar of buttons from the thrift shop on the corner and came back to leave 3 buttons on the back room sill for fastening new things to old. When I uploaded photos at night, my captions started to change. I wrote not just what the object was, but what I'd learned from the person who placed it, without names, without exposing specifics, just the thread the object had tugged in the world. Sugar jar chipped, a reminder that sweetness and air are related. Dog collar, medals for vigilance come without ceremonies. Recipe card, custard, patience is an ingredient. The site began to feel less like a catalog and more like the notepad of a town having a very careful conversation. The house loved rain days best. I had always thought of rain as something that kept people away. Not here. On the wettest days, the rooms filled with umbrellas in shy colors and abandoned galoshes guarding the front door. Voices came in damp and stayed to dry. Rain made our floors sing and our windows hush. It softened everything that could be softened and sharpened whatever refused. On a Thursday, when the sky or some god decided to wring out a lake over our heads, I came early to open the windows a crack and set towels on the sills. The house smelled like a library and a summer porch at once. Visitors wove slow, as if the rain had weighted them with attention. In the living room, droplets traced long, deliberate paths down the panes like thoughts you can finally follow. The paper crown held its shape. Moose's collar seemed darker, more grave. The Polaroid of the first dance looked freshly taken, as if joy can reprint itself. In the kitchen, the spoons looked like moons, their bowls gathering a little gray light. Someone had left a loaf of bread still in its paper sleeve. No note, just trust. The upstairs bedroom became a chapel of listening. You could actually hear the water on the roof, a steady count that made even the walls breathe in time. I took my camera and walked alone from room to room before the day began, not to document anything yet, but to let the house find its pitch. It wasn't silence. It was a hum. Not the nervous hum of a fluorescent light, but the human kind. The one that happens when a person sits with a sleeping child on their chest, or when a crowd waits in a theater just before the curtain lifts. It was everywhere if I paid for it with attention, in the strings of the paper cranes, in the metal of the spoons, in the quilt seams, in my camera strap. I set my palm against the living room wall and felt a faint tremor, not shaking, not sound, but something energy adjacent. Every object was a small heart. The house was a rib cage. I don't know if I made the sound or the house did, but something like "oh" left me. By late morning the rain found its range and steadied, and so did we. A former high school coach I barely remembered came in with a team photo from '89 and laid it under the paper crown. Then told me the boys used to practice plays in the Harper's yard because Mrs. Harper would shout suggestions from the porch like an armchair quarterback. A young couple brought a broken Christmas ornament, half a glass bird, and wrote, "We are leaving the part we couldn't fix. We are keeping the rest." A man in a suit, tie loosened, stood in the kitchen and ran his thumb over the dent in a ladle as if it could tell him a future. He confessed to me that he'd lived here 3 years and had never met his neighbors. "I thought community was a word for fundraisers," he said. "Turns out it's a door. I just didn't open it." I was different inside these conversations. Not intrusive, I hope. Not inquisitor, but present. I wasn't only collecting, I was connecting. People sometimes reached for my forearm when they wanted to anchor a word. I let them. Sometimes I reached back. The ledger on the hall table filled with my handwriting and with Joe's and with the occasional visitors when they asked to record their note themselves. We kept tissues in the front room and a plate of crackers in the kitchen. More than once I made tea. In the upstairs bedroom, a woman stood by the perfume bottle in her wet coat until the edge of the hem darkened the floorboards. "My mother never wore scent," she told me, eyes on the glass. "She said it got in the way of the coffee and the bread and the day." "And what do you wear?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, and then added, "I tried one once. I got in my car and thought, who is here with me? It was me, and I didn't recognize myself." She smiled, and the smile changed the room. I like to leave space for the cinnamon. We laughed, and then we didn't, because the perfume bottle caught a ribbon of gray light, and for a second it looked like a tiny thunderstorm, contained, and the briefness of the moment felt important. At the back room, my room, the window I loved went watery, and the strap took on the shine of wet leather, though it wasn't wet at all. Someone had tucked a feather beside it, brown with a white stripe. The tag said, "For balance," which made me want to write an essay I was not ready to write. I took a picture of the feather and didn't over-explain. Sometime after lunch, the power flickered and steadied, and someone clapped in the living room like you do for a pilot who nails the landing. People leaned into the day. The library director came with a stroller and a bag of stale bread for the birds that she forgot to feed at the pond because the baby fell asleep. And she left the bag on the kitchen table with a note that said, "For someone's bread pudding or forgiveness either." Two men in their 20s stood by the Polaroid of the first dance and argued amicably about whether slow dancing at prom was still a thing. A grandmother in a red raincoat told a teenager how to write a proper condolence note. "Say the name and say the thing and say you are here." In the late afternoon, with the rooms full and thoughtful, I noticed something new in the living room. A scrap of paper pinned to the curtain. Not our tags. Not the tidy index cards. This was torn from a notebook, the edges fuzzed and earnest. Someone had used one of our thumbtacks as if they belonged to the house now, which they did. I moved closer, part of my brain already making sure the pin would not tear the fabric, part already reaching for the camera. The handwriting was exuberant, like the person had hurried to catch a thought before it ran off. Every memory left here is a gift to the next visitor. Thank you for keeping them safe. I touched the curtain a centimeter below the pin. The fabric was cool from the draft, the spot where rain made air good. I took a photo of the note, then a closer one, then stepped back to catch the corner of the mantle in the frame so the paper crown could grin in the background. A woman near the doorway edged up beside me to read. She made a small sound not unlike the house's hum. "Did you put that up?" she asked. I shook my head. "Well," she said, "whoever did is right." Joe appeared like a punctuation mark at the end of a good sentence. She read the note and let out a breath I recognized as pride. "We should leave it," she said. "We should," I said. "It belongs." We did not know who wrote it, and I did not want to turn the house into a detective novel. The note didn't ask for a culprit. It asked for assent. So we consented. The curtain held the gratitude like a brooch. By closing time, the rain had backed off to a thin insistence, and the rooms let go of our day without scolding. I did my slow circuit, as I always do, straightening tags, tucking the bread into a tin with a handwritten "okay to eat," checking that the paper crown wasn't threatening to dive off the mantel, that the perfume bottle's cork wasn't nudged free. I paused in the back room and set my fingers on the windowsill near the strap like you touch the top of a sleeping animal's head. "We're safe," I told the house because I felt like it wanted to hear it. When everyone had gone, visitors, Joe, the two teenagers who came on Thursdays to help and to flirt, I stayed. I turned off all but one lamp in each room so the house glowed like a village. I went upstairs to the bedroom and sat on the floor. The rain had eased to that sound you hear inside a shell. The letter lay where it always lay. The shoe, the perfume. I closed my eyes. It's ridiculous to say the house spoke because there were no words, only the impression of a handful of truths arriving without their coats. But I felt spoken to. I felt the weight of a baseball in a hand I did not see. I smelled sugar. I heard paper folding into a crane. I sensed my own father's laugh, not in sound, but in the way my shoulders loosened as if something had been lifted from them and set in a place that wanted it. Each object hummed, yes, and between their hums a chord formed that made the room into an instrument. "You're listening," something said, and the answer was yes, and also, "We are." On my way down, I stopped by the living room and stood in front of the pinned note. The curtain made a small circle of breath around the thumbtack with every draft. I could have asked the house a question then. Who left the memory card? Why here? Why me? But those felt like questions for chapters I hadn't reached. Instead, I asked it a different one. What am I doing right? Lights off, porch locked, donation jar counted, door tugged twice to be sure. Doing the work felt suddenly like prayer. Outside, the night was a shaved cat kind of wet, sleek and shameless. I stood on the porch and listened to the slow talk of water in the gutters. The house behind me exhaled, wood settling. The town around me kept being itself. Someone practicing trumpet 3 streets over, a dog objecting to nothing in particular, a car turning too fast and then correcting course. At home, I opened the laptop and uploaded the day and saved the note as its own small page. Pinned to living room curtain, anonymous. I typed the words twice. The first time I wrote Curtian and had to backspace. The second time I got it right. I made a new section on the site, House Notes, and included the curtain's message at the top. I wanted the people who couldn't come on rain days to see it. I wanted the person who wrote it to feel waved at. Before bed, I walked into the guest room where my box of photos lived, the one Mrs. Ayers had saved for me. I lifted the lid and took out the Polaroid I'd taken at 12, the one of the Harper house under snow. I propped it on my dresser where I would see it before and after sleep. In the white margin beneath the image I wrote, with a very fine pen, a line borrowed and bent from the curtain. Thank you for keeping these safe. Night rain has a way of making even your own heartbeat sound borrowed. I lay there and listened to mine and decided it had learned something from the house. The next morning I woke before the clock and knew what I wanted to do. I made a small sign and taped it to the front hall table between the ledger and the bowl of pens. Tell me one thing you needed to hear once and finally heard. If you like, I'll write it on a tag for someone else. People did. All day they did. They told me they needed to hear, "You did your best with what you had," and "Take the nap," and "He loved you, that didn't change even when everything else did," and "It's okay to be the one who remembers the birthdays." I wrote these on tags and tucked them near the objects that understood. "Take the nap" went in the upstairs bedroom on the quilt with the polka dots. "He loved you" leaned near the love letter. "You did your best" lived for a while beside the spoon jar, and then inexplicably migrated to Moose's collar, which made a kind of wild sense. Late in the afternoon, a woman stood in the doorway, rain still on her shoulders, though the day had turned fair. She read the sign and then came to me and said, "The thing I needed to hear was that I didn't ruin everything." Did you? I thought so. But then my daughter sent me a photo of her kids eating soup, and I could see my mother's spoon in it, and I realized there were so many hands between me and everything. She smiled like someone being let back into her own house. "Can you write, 'You didn't ruin everything for me'? I don't care where you put it." I wrote it, and we placed it on the living room mantel near the paper crown, because it felt like a party ought to be involved. A few minutes before closing, a child, maybe 5, ran in, looked wildly around, and then galloped to the kitchen. "I have to leave something," he announced to no one and everyone. His mother came in breathless. "We talked about this in the car," she said to me apologetically. He was very firm. The boy took off one of his light-up sneakers, placed it beside Rose's little white shoe upstairs with reverent care, and said, "This one is for running very fast when you need to get somewhere that feels like home." He tied his socked foot into his other shoe with the seriousness of a surgeon. His note, dictated and written in my roundest letters, read, "For running, not away, but to." The house practically purred. We closed a little late because of laughter in the living room that refused to finish itself. On my way out, I touched the curtain near the pinned note again. The paper had curled a bit from the day's damp, like a smile. I wondered if the person who left it would return and see where it lived and feel seen. I hoped so. I hoped they would know how right they were. On the porch I looked back. The rooms glowed. The house looked like it had a pulse. We were keeping things safe here, yes, but we were also learning that safety isn't the same as stillness. These objects weren't entombed, they were employed. They were doing work, holding, reminding, teasing, forgiving, humming. The house spoke back by making more room, by keeping our weather, by returning our songs as echoes we could actually use. And I, Eliza, who thought she had to leave to be interesting, who thought silence was the only respectable stance, had started to talk. I was still careful. I still left margins. But I was in the conversation now. On the walk to my car, puddles held small photographs of the sky. I stepped wide when I could, and when I couldn't, I let my shoes learn something about water. The night was clear in the south, torn in the north. The crickets had decided on a tempo. I turned once more to look at the house and felt that quilt weight again, that heavy kindness. Tomorrow's door waited to open. I would unlock it. People would come. They would leave something. They would take something invisible home. The curtain would breathe. The objects would hum. And I, camera in my hand, strap on the sill behind me, my own handwriting now in the house alongside everyone else's, would keep asking and answering and being answered in return. We set the date for the open house like you set a table you want everyone to linger at, carefully with the best plates. Joe printed flyers with the house sketched in blue ink, and the library tucked them into book jackets, and the diner taped one to the pie case with the note, "Bring your memories, leave with ours." The high school art club made a banner that read, "The Living Archive," in letters cut from old magazines, so the words themselves contained stories. The radio station, 2 rooms over the barber shop and always slightly off frequency, promised to mention it every hour, as if the town needed reminding to come say goodbye to something that had already moved in. I spent the week before wandering the rooms with my camera slung over my shoulder like a companion I no longer mistook for a barrier. We dusted. We retied tags that had loosened. We pinned a few notes that kept sliding off the edges of themselves. In the kitchen, I wiped flower ghosts from the table with a cloth that once belonged to a church potluck. In the living room, I straightened the paper crown, which had acquired a crease that looked suspiciously like a grin. Upstairs, I fluffed the quilts with the care you give a sleeping cat you don't actually want to wake. In the back room, the sewing room that had become my hinge, I touched the camera strap with 2 fingers and told it, the way you tell a skittish animal, "We're still here." The Arts Council asked if I would present my photographs the way a teacher shows the first and last pages of a child's handwriting folder. This is how it started. This is how it changed. We set up easels along the hall and on the porch, prints mounted on thick boards that took the weight of the winter and the weight of the summer and didn't bow. I ordered the series the way the house had taught me to think, by weather rather than by date. The first images showed light falling into emptiness, dust caught mid-air, boards decompressing, the mantel bare as a jaw. Then came the arrivals, the baseball glove with its cut grass smell captured in the bend, the Polaroid of the first dance, its silver-specked surface reflecting the face of anyone who looked too closely, Moose's collar like a medal without a ceremony. The kitchen grew in the story the way kitchens do in life, spoons leaning like old friends, a sugar jar with the chip that had become a mouth, recipe cards whose handwriting told you everything you needed to know about the person who wrote them. Tidy, fierce, patient, playful. The upstairs bedroom held stillness that didn't punish. a perfume bottle full of amber light that no longer smelled like a shoulder but remembered the shape of one, a single white shoe with an impossible knot, a letter that apologized and then described the sky. At the end of one row, I placed the photograph of the pinned curtain note so people would meet the house speaking back. Every memory left here is a gift to the next visitor before they cross the threshold. I wanted people to feel themselves part of the sentence. Opposite that, near the front door, I hung the still from the memory card video. My father in the garden, his back telling the story of his laugh. My mother's invisible harmony in the footage like a weather pattern. Between them I left space. The house had taught me about margins. The morning of the open house, the light behaved. Not perfect. Perfect is a liar. The light was cooperative, forgiving, curious. The sky held a thin veil over itself as if to keep our eyes from squinting. The town came in waves. The first were the early people, the ones who bring casseroles and leave before the speeches. They moved with ceremony that wasn't formal, like tending. Then came those with children, who put their hands on small shoulders and said, "Look with your eyes first," and then relented and let the fingers touch certain things because touch is a kind of reading. By noon we were a sheet cake of bodies, edges and corners filled with polite, the middle dense and sweet. I stood by the hall table where the ledger lived and answered questions the way I do now, with my voice instead of a nod alone. "Where did you put the picture of the teams from '89? Someone asked. And I showed them the living room mantel where the crown wore the year like a habit. "Can I see that spoon again?" a woman asked. And I walked her into the kitchen where the spoons sat like planets, and listened while she told me how her mother had measured salt with the pinched index finger and thumb God gave her and never once got it wrong. A girl of 12 pointed at my camera strap on the sill and said, "I have the same one." And I asked to see her camera, and she unzipped a case, and there it was, plastic and possibility. People read the notes aloud to each other like poems. That, more than anything, threaded us. "Oh my God, listen to this one," a teenager said to his friend in a voice that had meant other things in hallways and now meant reverence. For Rose. And they both stood there, two boys in hoodies, and let the note fold into them like a letter addressed closer than their pockets. A man I recognized only by his posture, exhausted, upright anyway, stood by Moose's collar and laughed, actually laughed, when he read the line about Catfish, the living dog, in a later tag someone had tied where it needed to be. A woman from the next town over whispered the custard advice, "Do not hurry the quiet things," into her phone so she could keep it the way we keep music now. Mrs. Ayres wore a dress the color of early apples and moved like a person who had been saving her steps for this. She stood at my photo of the first empty hallway, the one with the line of light across the floor. and put 2 fingers on her mouth, the way she used to when she liked a student's sentence and wanted to keep it from flying away. When she turned, her eyes found mine with the clarity of a bell. "You didn't just photograph objects," she said. "You photographed permission." I kept thinking that every frame was really of somebody breathing, I said. She nodded. The town needed to hear itself breathe. So many telling lines crossed. The woman who left the teacup stood in the kitchen with a man who'd left a chipped mug from his first apartment, and they compared cracks like sailors comparing maps. The father who left the team photo shook hands with the guy who brought the half-glass bird, and they got to talking about what you keep when you can't keep everything. And by the time they finished, they had traded phone numbers for a pickup game. A teenager who'd left a friendship bracelet found the retired trucker who'd left a pack of matches from a diner in Wyoming and said, "I want my life to be that long," and the trucker said, "It doesn't have to be long to be wide," and the kid nodded like he'd learned a math the curriculum had missed. Around 2, Mrs. Harper's youngest, unknown to me except as a family name, showed up with his own son and stood on the porch under the banner, looking up. Joe brought them in with the calm you reserve for people who deserve a seat and a moment to decide if they want to sit. He walked the rooms like a person who remembers the shape of the walls from inside his body. When he reached the living room, he touched the mantel softly with the backs of his fingers and said, "Mama used to keep carnations there 'cause they didn't mind being ignored," and then laughed at himself and cried, the way we do when grief and joy share a room and neither is rude enough to leave. "Thank you," he said to no one and everyone. This house hadn't felt like mine in a long time. Now it feels like ours again. I made tea for strangers. I tied 2 tags for people whose hands had started to shake. I took photographs I didn't plan to take because the frames made themselves. A child kneeling in front of the paper crown, chin in hand like a scholar of parties. 2 old men standing shoulder to shoulder reading the love letter with their heads tilted at the same angle. A cluster of teenagers writing new tags in tiny print because they couldn't trust big letters for what they wanted to say. The Arts Council kept the speeches short. The mayor talked about stewardship without using the word twice. The librarian announced that a permanent exhibit would live in the bright room off the stacks, the former periodicals section, which felt like destiny, and that the rest would rotate through the town hall and the school and the diner. God help the gravy. So the archive would be less like a tomb and more like a train moving, returning, carrying. Joe thanked the volunteers. She thanked the objects for trying. Then she pointed to me, and the room, bless it, clapped in the ragged way of humans, not precise but true. I stepped forward, cheeks hot. Public speaking had once felt like a dentist drill, but the house had been tuning me for weeks. I didn't climb onto a chair, didn't need the height. I lifted my voice in the living room and it held like it had been meant for walls. When we opened, I said, the house sounded like boards and pipes and windows complaining that they'd been neglected. Now it sounds like people. I came back to town because I was tired of hearing myself not listen. You all have taught me how to keep still while someone else's story breathes. I pointed toward the hall where the prints lined up like open windows. These photographs are not the memory house. You are. The only way to carry this forward is the way we've been doing it, by handing each other the next small thing to hold. I saw faces tilt. I saw a woman in a red raincoat touch her collarbone. I saw a boy's mouth drop open because he had not expected to feel anything, and then found himself feeling everything. I finished with what the pinned note had said, and what we had learned to believe. Every memory left here is a gift to the next visitor. Thank you for keeping them safe. We clapped for each other. We clapped for the house. Then people went back to doing what communities do when they've been given a better excuse than a bake sale to stand around and feel known. Late afternoon, the sun burned a slow path across the floor. The crowds thinned, thickened, thinned again. I took the last round of portraits, hands on quilts, eyes on spoons, wet umbrellas opening like flowers in the entry, a tiny hand beside Rose's shoe, and the light-up sneaker placed next to it with the note that still made me exhale. For running, not away, but to. I found my own mother standing in the kitchen, fingers on the chipped sugar jar like she could coax sweetness to multiply, and we didn't say anything that required Kleenex. We just stood. That was its own speech. When the sky began shifting toward evening, Joe rang the little brass bell the council used when they needed attention without bossiness. "Last call," she said to a room that had learned to linger. People took one more pass. Someone kissed their fingers and touched the paper crown. Someone slid a recipe card back into perfect alignment. Someone took a picture of the curtain with the pinned note, and I watched them frame it wrong twice and then get it right on the third try, and their face changed like a cloud. We formed a kind of procession without planning it. Not solemn, not giddy, just human. I walked the rooms one last time with the town behind me the way tide follows the moon. In the living room, I bowed a little to Moose's collar. In the kitchen, I placed my palm on the table where the flower ghosts had dwindled and said the nicest thing I know how to say to a room. Thank you for feeding us. Upstairs, I touched the dresser near the perfume bottle, the bed near the quilts, the wall near the love letter. Not to mark them, but to be marked. In the back room, I stood by the sill and put my fingers on my strap. "You can come with me," I told it, and then laughed at myself. "You can stay too." That's what the house had been teaching me, that memory is not a custody battle. It's joint guardianship with time. I left the strap where it was because I liked the way the light held it. I slipped my photo strip of Mia, finally under the strap so a corner peeked out. I wrote a small tag that didn't pretend to explain. It just nodded. For the friend who always knew where the story started. At the front hall, the ledger waited for its last signatures. People wrote their names and sometimes new notes, and sometimes simply drew a small heart. And I turned down one page and then another with the weight of a person tucking in a child. The donation jar felt heavier than it looked. The house had been paid in coins and in kindness. We would balance the books and call it even, which is the only way books agree to be balanced. When the final guest stepped onto the porch, I felt that old tug, a fear that closing a door means losing what is inside. But the house and I were done with that superstition. We had proof otherwise. I switched off the lamps room by room, and each time the dark arrived, it revealed more than it hid. The outline of the piano that hadn't been played but had held music anyway. The rectangle of the rug whose fringe lay obedient as a prayer. The window squares becoming mirrors for the first stars. Jo hugged me with both arms and her cheek against my temple like a sister. "You did it," she said. "We did it," I said. "They did it." "Are you ready?" she asked, and I knew she meant the part where I would turn the key. "Ready," I said, and meant it. We stepped onto the porch. The evening had that late summer smell, grill smoke far off, cut grass stepping toward sleep, the faint sweetness of the bakery letting the last loaves go. I turned the key in the lock and felt the latch catch with the clean satisfaction of a yes. Instead of the drop in my stomach I used to feel when I closed things, the little grief that says ending, 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 I felt lift. It was physical, like the town had taken a breath and was holding it not anxiously but with gratitude, the way you hold air before blowing out birthday candles. I didn't walk away immediately. The house glowed behind the glass with the light I had left on by the stairs, a polite beacon for whoever would need to come next. Curators, movers, librarians with carts and a system. The windows looked like eyes that had already seen what they needed to see and were resting without closing. I lifted my camera because I couldn't not. One last frame, the porch lamps pooling light on the steps, the banner in shadows like a memory of applause, the long rectangle of the front hall catching a smear of gold. I pressed the shutter and heard my father's voice in the muscle of my back, that old weather saying yes. It's true what people say about work that matters. It follows you home, but not to haunt, only to inhabit. As I walked down the path, the conversations I'd heard hummed like crickets. He loved you. That didn't change. Do not hurry the quiet things. You didn't ruin everything. I could see in my mind's eye where the objects would go next. The library's bright room would hold Moose's collar beside the team photo, and someone finishing a term paper would look up and remember they are not the only person ever to try. The diner would display the paper crown near the pie case, and we would all choose a slice more often. The school would take the recipe cards for a unit called Handwriting as Heritage, and teenagers would accidentally learn patience from custard. The town hall would hang the love letter in the clerk's office, where people argue about permits and remember the sky. On the sidewalk, my neighbors walked with their heads lifted, as if the house had given them taller spines. 2 kids biked past, brakes squealing in a language I understand. The retired trucker waved from his porch as if he'd been waiting to wave at someone all day. The librarian pushed an empty stroller and whistled a tune from the cassette we'd played in the living room, singing Bad, Do Not Judge. The man in the suit with the ladle passed me, tie loose again, and said, "We should have an open house for the whole town sometime," and then laughed because he had just come from one. A dog barked at nothing and everything. I hoped privately that it was catfish. At home, I set my camera on the table and took out the print from the memory card, the photo of my father's laugh in his back, the one that had returned to me when I thought the door was shut. I taped it next to the Polaroid of the Harper house in winter. 2 houses, 2 times, 2 kinds of weather. In the space between them, my life. My mother came in from the garden with basil on her hands and said, "We did good," and I said, "We did." And neither of us needed to name the it for the itty to feel complete. Later, I uploaded the last images and composed the final page for the site. I kept it simple. Open house, I typed as a header, and beneath it, "Thank you for speaking with each other." I posted a gallery, faces, hands, small details, buttons tucked on a sill, the feather for balance, a glass of water sweating on the kitchen table like a person nervous about their own thirst. At the bottom I wrote, "The archive will live on, at the library, at town hall, at the diner, in our pockets, on our tongues." I included the curtain's note as the epigraph and a photo of the quiet house as its closing line. Before bed, I walked out onto the porch and let the night find my skin. The town sounded like a record player slowing to its sweetest speed. I could feel the hum in my bones, not just the house's hum, but the hum of being among. I had come back to find my camera gone mute, and my heart unsure of its language. I was leaving this chapter with my lens full and my mouth softened toward speech. That last picture of the glowing windows sits now at the end of my series. When I look at it, I can hear the click I made on the porch, and also every click that brought me to it. The empty rooms that weren't empty. The first object set down with shaking hands. The first laugh. The first time a child said, "I want to leave something." And we made room. The day the rain taught us to listen for compression and release. The anonymous note pinned to the curtain. The card on the sill that gave me back my father's shoulders. The strap I left and the strip I tucked beneath it. The way the house spoke back, not with words, but with permission. I don't believe in hauntings, not the scary kind, but I believe in residencies. The memory house lives in me now, the way a song lives in your throat after you've sung it with other people. When I close my eyes, I can walk its rooms without turning on a light. I can set my palm against the wall and feel the small heartbeats of the objects that have gone on to their next jobs. I can hear the town in conversation with itself. I can hear myself among them. When the council asked if I'd help install the permanent exhibit at the library, I said yes, without that old pause that used to disguise itself as poise. When Mrs. Ayers asked if I'd teach a workshop on photographing what breathes, I laughed and then said yes to that too, even though the title embarrassed me with its earnestness. When the diner owner asked for a copy of the custard photo to hang next to the coffee machine because our custard is average, but we like the advice, I delivered it the next morning and left with a slice of pie I hadn't asked for. On my way home that night, I passed the Harper house and slowed. The porch light the council had left on blinked like an eye deciding whether or not to nap. I pulled over. I got out. I stood at the gate, hands in pockets, not to trespass, but to greet. The house held its shape, the way a friend holds a thought while you finish yours. I raised my camera because it's what I do when I don't want to forget. One last photo, proper, honest, abundant in its quiet. The windows glowing without urgency, the banner taken down leaving two neat hooks like commas, the doorknob catching a last seam of light. I pressed the shutter. The sound landed and dissolved in the warm evening air like a promise that knows it will be kept. Then I put the camera down and walked back into a town that felt taller, wider, truer. The memories had followed me out of the house the way birds follow a boat at sea. Not petitioners, not burdens. Companions. I could feel them roosting on porches, perching in kitchen windows, tucking themselves into the elbow of the maple at my old house, curling under the pie glass at the diner. I could feel them in my own ribs, patient, humming. The door behind me was locked. The archive ahead of me lived. I went home, already writing the caption in my head, already knowing I would never be finished. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night. Until next time.